Hello, everyone. Hope you had a good weekend. I always kind of drag at the beginning of Mondays. I wake up and I sleep pretty deeply, but I wake up and get up in the morning and I'm just kind of like waiting for the caffeine to kick in, and usually kicks in right around this class, which is fine, except I have a class at 9:30, so usually I'm kind of a walking dead on the 9:30 class, which is a challenge. But I feel like I'm ready to go, and we got some stuff to talk about today. Some quick announcements. Just as a reminder, please make sure you're keeping track of the syllabus schedule. I know that you get the reminders through Brightspace, but the reminders are only set for 2 days in advance, and some of the things may take you longer than 2 days. So I do want to remind you that your your first deliverable for the AI assignment is due on Monday, so a week from today. We will have one more AI cram session, I guess to call it one I research session on Friday to give you some ideas. So if you want to work on it on the weekend, it's great. By this time, you probably can have some good ideas about what it is that you want to do work on. Please keep in mind that it is not specifically restricted to something in this class. Like you say, how can I use AI to develop UML diagrams? Well, that's a noble calling. I'm going to guess most of the people in this room are not going to be fascinated with UML diagrams in their careers. If you're one of those rare people who's just like, I love UML diagrams, Dr. Barnes, I wish I could learn more about them, maybe that's an opportunity for you. But my assumption is that's not going to be the case. So you can kind of pick and choose your own topic about what it is you're going to be looking into. So keep that in mind. That's coming up. It's not a big deliverable. It's only 1 to 2 pages, pretty short and to the point. But it's still something you need to have to spend a little bit of time on. As for today, very first thing that we need to do, if you've not done so already, is go to Start menu on your computer, and if you're on your own computer, that's fine. You may want to connect to remote desktop. Sorry, view.truman.edu, as this is also going to be something you have access to. But you want to go to the Start menu, and we're going to go to Microsoft Power BI Desktop and click on that and start that up. And we're going to be doing some activities in Microsoft Power BI today. Nothing too fancy, nothing too strict. If you're familiar with it already, this is going to seem very remedial to you. Again, I have to operate under the assumption that everybody's operating at the same level. So my guess is that some of the people in the class are going to find this very, very easy. Some people may find it very insightful for the first time. But we're just going to be doing some visualization stuff today, and open that up. The reason I'm mentioning doing that now is because it is on the Microsoft license, so you'll have to go through the sign in for your Microsoft tool, and probably put in your password ID and then your duo factor authentication, and that's going to take a little bit of time to take care of. So I don't want anybody to fall behind. So go ahead and do that now. We'll talk a little bit about the nature of Power BI and some of the advantages and disadvantages of Power BI, particularly in this classroom setting. But for the most part, hopefully this should not be too difficult an assignment of what we're going to be doing today. Today, the assignment that we're doing today is actually there's no deliverable associated with it. It's going to be entirely for a learning experience. However, you do have a Power BI assignment for your homework due on Wednesday. So you'll want to make sure that you have some familiarity with what we're doing today for what you're going to do on Wednesday. The stuff we're going to do on Wednesday is very, very easy, fairly straightforward. But we'll talk a little bit about that as approach. So remember when we stopped on chapter 10, we talked about the AMPS model, okay? So AMPS model, 4 parts: ask the question, master the data, perform the analysis, share the story. When we talked about the first 3, ask the question is pretty basic. Data is only relevant if it can provide information. And so we need to know what types of questions can we ask of the data. By the way, what was the term for asking a question of data? What did I call that? That's a query. Yeah, it's a query. Whenever you hear the term query, that's basically asking the question of the data. All right. So we're going to be doing a lot of that. But to be able to understand that, we need to understand what types of overall queries, what types of questions we can ask. Okay. So the next step is mastering the data, which is that ETL process, which ETL, remember, takes a long time. It's about 50 to 90% of the work that you'll be doing in data analysis. So that's something to look forward to if you like it. If you don't like it, maybe data analysis is not going to be something you enjoy, but it is a really important step because we want to make sure that the data is valid, that it's clean, that it's logical, it's precise, that it actually can be used for what it is for the task that we're trying to use it for. Then we have perform the analysis, which is the fun part. That's where we actually take those questions and we put it into the tool of our choice and run the analysis. So we know what questions we ask. We have to figure out how to formulate those into a task a method that can be asked. The final step is share the story. Now, share the story can be done in a number of different ways. What we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about visualization. And visualization is kind of interesting in the fact that data visualization has not really existed in this context that we exist today for a very long time. I would say if you go back to the 1970s, it did not really exist in any context. We had computerized tools, but there was no real way of sharing that information. It kind of rose to prominence in the 1980s and 1990s, and the tool that was primarily used for was Excel. In fact, Excel used to be the visualization tool of choice until probably the mid 2000s. And I know that sounds really antiquated and archaic to say, well, Microsoft Excel is so simple and so basic. And you have to understand that that wasn't always the case. It used to be a lot more powerful relative to other tools. I think I told the story that when I used to work in data analysis at KPMG, we would actually run the data analysis in one program, export our data results into Excel, and then run the Excel results for visualization purposes. So it's not that long ago that Excel was a visualization tool, because that's 20 years ago that I worked at KPMG. I started in 2005, and we were using Excel as a visualization tool. So these visualization tools we have nowadays are fairly new and recent. When I talk about that, I'm talking about Power BI, which we're going to talk about today. I talk about Tableau, and you may have some familiarity with those. The nice thing is that there's not necessarily a compartmentalization of these tools. Just because I say something's a visualization tool can't mean it can't be used for other purposes. So Power BI and Tableau, while we say they're visualization tools, they can be run for analysis. They can be run for basically sorting of data. They do kind of have features of what we think about database tools, database programs, and we'll see some of the overlap with that. So if you have familiarity with Access, some of the things that we're going to see in Power BI are going to seem very familiar in that as well. But it's not a one-size-fits-all. It is, sorry, I shouldn't say it's not really a one-size-fits-all tool, but it does have elements of other tools that we can actually incorporate. All right, so let's talk about the basics of visualization, then we'll get to the fun part. So visualization is the process of presenting information through images. Why? Why do we actually present information through images? It goes back to the same reason why we go through those crazy diagrams that we did back in the first part of the semester. Those BPMN diagrams and UML diagrams. It's because if we actually presented things through words and just through vocal accounts, people would get tuned out very quickly, and they don't follow that very easily. Having visual images tends to convey a lot more information in a much more simpler format to the way that human minds operate. Now, you may be one of those people that actually enjoys the written word and can actually get a good depiction, but probably 95 to 99% of human beings, they operate much more effectively when they can see what the results are of a particular scenario. So that's why we went through all the task of visualization back in the first part of the semester, is because we wanted to make sure the diagrams can actually visualize the process for people. They can understand the process easier when you see rectangles and arrows pointing around than saying the narrative description is saying, when we finish the purchase order process, then it moves over to the sales order and what on and so forth. I know I'm kind of conflating some of the things, but some things to note about visualization is that visualization can actually fit different purposes depending on what it is we need the visualization for. Here's an example of a lot of different types of visualizations. You do not need to memorize everything on this slide. However, I would make sure that you're very, very familiar with the next, I think it's next 6 slides after this, because what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about what are the scenarios of information that we need to convey through visualization, and what are the proper visualization tools for doing that. So even though you don't need to memorize all the visualizations on this chart, I would strongly, strongly recommend, for the purposes of preparing for the exam, that you become very familiar with the next 6 slides, okay? 100% chance I will ask questions on them, and likely ask multiple questions about this particular concept. So what is it that we use visualization for? So let's talk about the different concepts. So first of all, let's talk about categorical information, all right? So categorical information, easy way to think about it, like geographic information. That's the way it's presented here. We could talk about categories of students at Truman State. There's a lot of different ways to categorize students at Truman State. Talk about class, you can talk about major, you can talk about school they operate in, discipline. There's a lot of different ways to think about that. How would we do that? We basically are going to use vertical or horizontal bar charts to present that information. So we present it side by side and for comparative purposes. As you can see here, the horizontal and vertical bar charts kind of show, based on different areas of categories, how this operates. And one of the nice things about the new modern bar charts is that the bar charts can actually present multiple categories simultaneously. So if you look at the comparative columns bar charts that actually shows here, we notice that there's 2 different series of categories. There's the category about where the geography operates, as well as what year we're operating within. So be able to separate out those analyses provides for a little bit more meaningful, robust comparison. This is probably the one that you would use the most in data analytics, as oftentimes we're trying to compare different categories to one another and evaluate performance. So this is something that we can very easily operate on, something that you probably are very familiar with already. But there's different ways of presenting this information depending on the nature of the categories, as we're going to get into a little bit more detail about. Now, something closely related to this that is a little bit confusing is going to be our next visualization, okay? This is going to be univariate analysis. And this is where we're going to use a histogram. Now, you may be thinking histogram looks very similar to a bar chart. And in effect, it is very, very similar to the bar chart. One of the big differences in a histogram, though, is a histogram tends to isolate information and show it on a ranking or ordinal preference. Whereas when we talk about categorization in a bar chart, it can actually be ordered, but for the most part, it's going to just be according to whatever the categories set up are. Now you'll notice that we don't have categories, we have actually values that we're trying to determine. And we say univariate analysis, we've got one variable of interest, a single variable of interest. So we actually say that this is going to be what our dependent variable is, and then our independent variable, this would be the independent variable or the dependent variable, depending on how we set up the bar chart. So saying as we change one, as we actually look at the return asset values, how many firms do we have in a particular category? And so as the return on assets increases, fewer firms actually meet the guideline of the return on asset values for that. So we're going to be actually looking at return on assets and measuring what the performance is there. Okay, so that's going to be our univariate analysis. But obviously, if we got univariate analysis, we need to understand what is going to be our multivariate analysis. And I think I said independent variable, and that was a misnomer. We really only have one variable here, okay? And this is just going to be our measurement variable here. When we talk about multivariate analysis, we do have independent and dependent variables, okay? And that's going to be in a multivariate analysis and actually shows the correlation between two continuous variables. Now, I do want to provide a little bit of context here. If you have taken statistics classes before, you probably have heard about these types of analyses. This is a very simplistic analysis that's meant to represent a regression and analysis in context. And you probably performed regressions before and you say, Dr. Barnes, I seem to recall that in a regression analysis that we had more than two variables. And you're absolutely right. A regression analysis can actually present multiple variables. But keep in mind when you perform a regression analysis, basically what you're doing is you're holding all other independent variables constant and looking at the relationship between two variables, an independent variable and a dependent variable. So basically, see, when we talk about this particular analysis here, we've got two analyses. We've got our dependent variable over here on the y-axis and the independent variable here. And we want to know as our independent variable changes, what happens to the value of the y-axis, okay? So we may say something like student age right here and performance on AIS exams and see if there's a correlation between that. And now obviously that would be silly because there's probably not a correlation between student age and performance on AIS exams, but that would be an example of what we're trying to measure. And these would be really, really weird ages because we have 0 to 12. But anyway, you kind of see my point here is we're trying to actually measure relationships between two variables. That does not mean that other variables cannot exist, but those other variables are considered to be held constant in the measurement when we try to do that. So scatter plots shows correlation between two continuous variables, which again is a visual representation of kind of the regression analysis we've seen before for multivariate analysis. All right, some more straightforward ones. This one I particularly like as it was not a tool that we actually had until we had modern visualization tools, are going to be a geospatial data, okay? And these are where we use maps and symbol maps. Again, one of the reasons that I think this is fascinating is I remember growing up in a day and age when we did not have maps that were available in visualization tools. The new modern age tools, the Power BI and Tableau, can actually do geospatial data as long as you actually have a way of representing geography within the data set itself. And it really depends. You can actually do it based on zip code. You can do it on state. You can do it on country. All of these are certain possibilities that you can actually have, and the tools will actually recognize them. Then we have time trends over time, and these are going to be line charts. Now, this is one of those ones that tends to get misused. But keep in mind that when we're looking at time trends, we're trying to see what is the relationship between something as it was in the past, as it looks in the future. And we want to see large variations. So what we're looking at in time trends is we're looking at spikes in either upwards directions or downwards directions, and a large amount which is possible, but it's not nearly as effective as doing something with a line chart. That's why we like to use line charts for time trend analysis. And yeah, and so apparently my interconnect connection is also unstable. Oh, there we go. All right, so I apologize. Did that actually appear on the screen up there saying my internet connection was unstable? Okay, all right. I guess that's only for the people who are watching on via Zoom. So yeah, I have some bad experiences with my Zoom shutting down in the past, and so yeah, I always am a little bit fancy when that happens. That's really not relevant to our discussion though. Okay. Finally, what we're going to talk about is we're going to be talking about pie and donut charts, and these are proportional shares of the total at a single point in time. So we actually measure at a point in time what the proportional shares are. So this could actually be categorical analysis, but we could actually quantify categorical analysis through this, which is kind of nice. So say, for example, I want to know what is the proportional share of all the different classes or all the different classes within this course. So I want to know how many freshmen are in this course, how many sophomores, how many juniors, how many seniors, and what the proportional share is to the whole, okay? So if I say 25% are sophomores, 50% are juniors, and 25% are seniors, that would be an easy way to analyze it. I seriously doubt there's any freshmen in this course, but if you are a freshman, kudos to you on being achievement-oriented. So yeah, so that would be an example of the way we could actually do the categorical analysis, but do it on a proportional basis. All right. So yeah, those are going to be the tools. And again, like I said, very important to be able to understand the difference between these and when they're used in certain visualization situations, what the scenario is. So here's a table that kind of summarizes all this. Again, I think it's very important to make sure you understand this because proper visualization can convey good information. Bad visualization doesn't have any value whatsoever. So be able to talking is because Zoom just rebooted. All right, great. Okay. All right. Sorry, Colin, I'm gonna have to get started again. Okay. This is actually kind of a opportune pause because I finished the lecture part and now I'm gonna start working on the visualization part. So it works out well. Okay. It wasn't going, oh wait. Okay, it's still recording. Okay, just didn't pause recording. Okay, so now everybody gets to hear me talking about the recording. All right, so weird. All right, so ignore all the rambling that I just had, okay? We're gonna ignore all that rambling. We're gonna be talking about visualization. And like I said, it used to be visualization was kind of limited to spreadsheet tools, primarily Excel. We've got Tableau and Power BI now. There's not really a preference for me about Tableau versus Power BI. I will say I'm not very strong in either one of those just because they are new tools and they've come out relatively recent compared to my business experience. One thing that the reason that we're kind of focusing on Power BI is that Power BI is one of the things that's available automatically with our subscription package to Microsoft here. So you'll notice it's actually installed on the computers. If you have access to Tableau and are learning about Tableau, great. I know there are a lot of professors who love to talk about Tableau. If you have already used Power BI, this is going to seem fairly simplistic. One thing I do want to note, this is really important with respect to Power BI. Microsoft has made it their commitment that they will make consistent updates to Power BI every single month. Every single month they update something in Power BI. Sometimes the updates are very, very minimal. Sometimes they're massive. I do not think that Truman State updates every single month. I think they do an annual update, but they do pretty consistent updates. And so it will actually change the parameters here. The reason I mention this, let's say that we're working through this and you say, I don't remember exactly what Dr. Barnes said in class. I'm going to go read in the book what it says about Power BI. If you look in the current book, it's 2021. It actually talks about the version of Power BI that was in place in 2021. Are there differences? Yes. Are they subtle and indistinct differences? For the most part, some of them are pretty profound. Like some of the things that we're going to talk about, there's actually different terminology altogether. Now, as intelligent individuals, you should be able to figure out when something is a little bit different, what the correlation is. Okay, I think everybody can figure that out. It wasn't really difficult for me. But if you're looking for exact vernacular, looking through exact steps, if you use the book, you may find the book is a little bit outdated and antiquated. I have tried to update this. I actually came into the classroom on Friday, worked through this activity on that computer and on this computer. I also worked through it so much on the road desktop. I think everything is going to be consistent. But if I start working through something and you notice an inconsistency, first of all, you can raise your hand and say, that's not the way it looks on my screen, Dr. Barnes, and I'll just flounder a little bit. That's my goal. But we can try to work through it together. It's important to note that what you're going to be learning today, it will likely not be the same tool that you would work on, say, a year from now or 2 years from now. There will be updates over time. So if there's an inconsistency, I apologize. The good news is the whole of the tool itself is pretty much the same as it was before. The changes are, I won't say superficial, but they are changes that we can actually digest pretty easily. We can actually figure out what the changes are and why they were made. So with that, let's go ahead and start with Power BI. Hopefully you've already opened up Power BI desktop on your computer. If you've got that open, great, and you want to actually start that up. Not particularly difficult. It does take a few seconds to start up. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be uploading a download report. And I guess what I probably should have mentioned is, and I'm going to ramble on while everybody does this, on Brightspace right now for this week, there should be a file called Data Analytics Demo Original. And I will show you basically what that looks like. So this is an Excel file. It's on Brightspace. And this is a file that we're going to use for our analysis. And you can kind of open the file. Yeah, you don't need to open the file. You just need to download this and get this available. So go to Brightspace and download this. And you can see that it's got 3 tabs available in this file. So this would actually be okay for us to do analysis in Excel by itself, but we could actually do some more powerful and meaningful analysis if we can import this to Tableau, or sorry, Tableau, to Power BI. I'm losing it. So yeah, we do want to download this file, again in Brightspace. So I'm going to go ahead and pause real quick so everybody can get that file downloaded if I did that, because I forgot to mention that. So, all right, so basically, you're going to download that file from Brightspace and have that somewhere accessible on your computer, and we are going to actually use our Power BI tool to import that. So let's just go ahead. I'm going to minimize this and move back and forth in between these just to make sure we have access to this. And if you want to follow along the slides, then you will. They may become distracting when I blink back and forth, but I don't think there's any more effective way for me to do this. You will see that we've got this Excel workbook link right here. So go ahead and click on that. And it's going to ask you to identify where this Excel file is. And you should be able to find it wherever you stored it on your computer. So go ahead, once you've identified the file name, double click on that. And it's going to start loading the file for you. I can tell that it's kind of processing because it's got these ellipses that run through here. But eventually, you can get to this point where it'll have everything loaded and you can preview what the files are. So you can see what the customer's file looks like, the orders file, and the stores file. Now, this is an opportunity for you to actually determine what data you want to use for your analysis. In the real world, we may not use all of the tabs in a particular file. We may have hundreds of tabs, and we may only want to use like 2 or 3 of those. So we can import meaningfully to determine what it is we want. In this particular scenario, this data has been cleaned for us and prepared for us already. So we're just going to use all 3 tabs. So we're going to click on the checkbox next to all 3 of these. And you can see that's one of the instructions that I gave you in the PowerPoint slides. Click on all 3 data boxes and then click the load button. So once you've actually clicked the check mark boxes, go ahead and click on load. And we'll give you a screen here where everything's loading up. And basically what it's doing is it's not only loading these files, but it's reading these files right now to determine if relationships exist among the data, which, to be honest, is actually really cool and something that Access is, well, last time I used Microsoft Access, it was not able to do. So that's something that we're going to be able to note is very, very prominent here. So you'll notice here, we now have 3 data sets over here. And if you click on the down arrows over the next to the data set, it will tell you the fields or the columns. So the attributes that we actually had imported. It's actually got all of the data in here, and we'll be able to see that data here in just a second, but this is going to be our primary use for this information. Now, there's a few things to note that are really, really important here, okay? So the first thing to note is that there's going to be multiple views of being able to look at the data. This is where we're going to create our visualization, and this is going to be our visualization point, which is going to be called the report view, okay? So you can highlight over here, we're on the report view right now, which is what creates our visualization. Then we've also got something called the table view, which we can go and click on that. And going to the table view will actually show us what it looks like natively to Excel, or to whatever table or format we input it from. So that our customers, our orders, our stores, and you can see what the tables themselves look like. But probably the most important one that we need to look at is going to be this one right here, which this is the model view. By the way, I want to make a quick note of this. This is just for your own reference. In previous versions of Tableau, the table view used to be called the data view, and the model view used to be called the relationships view. The only reason I mention that is, again, if you read this in the book, it'll be termed as different, something different. It's pretty obvious to figure out what they're talking about when they look at it in the book, but if you read the book and you want to figure this out, table again is data and model is relationships. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's take a look at this this view right here. I want to take a look at this model view. So we've actually got the three tables listed here, and you can kind of move these around, although it's a little bit limited as to what space you have. I want to make this a little bit smaller so we can read it. There's a lot going on here, and it doesn't seem like there's a lot, but we need to talk about it. So first of all, we've got our three tables that were imported here, sorry, our three data sets that were imported here, three tabs that are listed all as tables, which is kind of cool. So this should seem somewhat familiar to you already. Does this look like anything that we've dealt with already? Yeah, this looks like our UML diagram relationships, okay? And so it actually has our UML tables here. And some of the things that are interesting to note here is you will notice that there's some associations listed here. If you highlight, just put your cursor over the association bars, it will actually show you how the tabs themselves are linked. So you'll notice that the stores tab, it actually has a store identifier, which is the primary key for that particular table. And it's listed as in the customer table as store identifier. That's how it was actually able to link those two tables. Same thing over here to stores and orders. Actually, they're linked by the store identifier field. And then we can actually link these two fields as well because they have a customer number, which is the primary key for customers listed in the orders table. Now, people have asked me in the past, does the direction of these arrows make a difference? The answer is yes, okay? The direction implies where is the primary key coming from and where is it going to as a foreign key? So remember, we got this arrow pointing towards the customer tab. It's saying store identifier, which is the primary key here, is moving over here to the customer table as a foreign key. So that arrow actually implies where the primary key comes from and where it goes to as a foreign key. Also, you will notice there's some numbers over here. Does anybody catch those numbers? Actually, numbers and stars. Anybody want to guess what those represent? They're multiplicities. Yeah, they're multiplicities, although specifically, they're the upper bound multiplicities. They don't actually present the lower bound multiplicities. They actually represent the upper bounds. So you can kind of make an interpretation here because we have stores, okay? Stores can have a minimum of 0 orders or a maximum of many orders. So that's what the many here is here. An order can have one store and only one store, all right? So we can have that interpretation here. Again, we're not really going to the purpose of the interpretation of UML diagrams. We're past that point, but it's kind of cool to see this in action of what we've seen before. Just a little bit of different representation here. Now, the reason this is so important is that we define the relationships between these tables. We can actually treat these tabs as a relational database, which means that if I run a query on one data tab, I can actually pull data from another tab that's related to that and pull that into the analysis. So these relationships are really, really important to identify. And if you don't have these relationships in here, it makes the visualization a lot more challenging. So this is one of the things that's really important to make sure this is correct. You will want to check this first for any Power BI analysis that you do to make sure the relationships are defined. If they are not correctly defined, then you have to adjust those. Fortunately, I think for everybody in this room, these models should already be defined for you. Does everybody have the same thing I've got up here? All right, good. If you have something different, then now's the way science like panic, Dr. Barnes, something's going on here. I don't know what's going on. The great news is that Power BI will do a really good job of identifying these relationships. It's very, very efficient, especially if the data is clean enough. All right, let's go ahead and go over to the table view now. All right, we want to move over the table view. So again, the table view actually shows what the tabs look like when they get exported from Excel. Now, One of the things that's really cool about Power BI is that when you import the information, it retains the integrity of that information. So we're not going to change any of the data by doing some analysis, but we can still add a manipulation to this. We can manipulate the information and will not actually fundamentally change the information. Now, remember, I said one of the problems with Excel is that if you do analysis in an Excel table and you don't have that original data saved somewhere, if you make a change to that data, that change is permanent. All right. It doesn't highlight and just go back and say, okay, we're going to go back to the original data. Changing anything in an Excel table will permanently change the Excel table, which you have to be very careful about operating Excel. We can actually manipulate data in Tableau and not affect the original data itself. So we're going to do something like that. Let's go ahead and I want you to go to the orders tab or the orders table. And let's go ahead and look and see what we got here. So you'll notice here that we got some information about what was sold, the price at which was sold, and the sale amount. So logically speaking, is sale amount a function of these two right here? So should quantity sold times sales price equal the sale amount? Yeah, can we check that? Yeah, we could manually go through, we can multiply 110 times 12 to see it equals 1320. Or we could have Tableau do the work for us. So let's say that I want to check that. I want to make sure it's consistent. I'm going to create a new column. All right, so click over here. So you do need to be on the orders tab, but this won't work if you're on the other tabs. It needs to be on the orders tab. We're going to click on new column. And this is a virtual column. This is something we're creating. We're adding to the analysis. We've added to it. We're just going to do a quick test amount calculation. I'm going to call this test amount. And remember, we said that this is going to be quantity sold times sales price. So I'm just going to start typing in quantity sold. And if you look, it will actually have a field called orders and quantity sold that we can select here. It's also got some other functions that we can include here, but we don't need to worry about those. So we're going to click orders, quantity sold. Then we're going to click the multiply symbol, which for Microsoft is always that star symbol. And then we're going to say sales price. I'm going to type in SA. And I'm going to find order sale price. By the way, this formula is actually in the slides. If you get lost here and curious about it, this is actually the formula that I have in the slides. So quantity sold times sales price, and I just want that piece of information, okay? And then just click on the commit, and it'll create that new column, which allows us to check and make sure that the numbers are consistent across. Which can be a nice little audit tool to make sure that those are consistent with one of those or those items. And it gets added as a new column or a new item in our data fields as well, which is kind of nice. We wanted to create some virtual items. There's also some manipulation we can come over here. You will notice that these last three columns, these are all dollar amount fields, whereas quantity sold is a numeric field, but it's not listed as numeric. We can actually change the properties of these. Like I could change test amount to currency. Same thing for sale amounts. I can change sale amount to currency. I'm going to do the same thing for sale price. If you wanted to add a dollar symbol, you can just make that consistent. That way we have some consistency across knowing what a currency and what are general numbers. All right, let's go to the fun part. Let's go to the report view. Okay. So we're going to be doing some very basic stuff. Again, the sky's the limit on this. The analysis you can perform are a lot more diverse than what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to keep it pretty simple because my assumption is most of the people in the class have not done this. So this should be pretty straightforward. Again, if this is pretty easy for you, great. That's all I'm really looking for here. That everybody's on the same page here. So we can actually create a lot of data. We're going to create a categorical data analysis, which remember, categorical data is going to be some sort of bar chart. So let's go ahead and create a stacked bar chart, which is this first symbol here. By the way, this area right here represents all the different visualization selections that we can have here. So this can actually tell us, this is going to be where we pull the data for this. But let's just go ahead and create a stacked bar chart. I'm going to compress this filters. We're going to use the filters again here in just a second, but I want to compress it so this is a little bit easier to read. So we can actually expand this out to a lot of different ranges. There's a couple different ways we can do this. We could actually just do this half the screen, and then we can have another visualization down here if we wanted. We could even break this down into quarters. wanted to, let's see, hold on, there we go. You do this in quarters. I can have 4 visualizations working at the same time. You could have 3, you could have 1/4 here, 1/4 here, and half. If it seems spurious that I'm mentioning this, this is actually relevant to your homework. This is why I'm pointing this out, okay? Because you'll want to have multiple visualizations simultaneously. For our purposes, we're just going to use one visualization, so we can actually expand it out to the entire view. So let's just do a very basic visualization. Let's say I want to know the sales by state, okay? I want to know the sales by state. So let's go ahead and go to stores, and I want you to collapse that arrow, or unclaps that arrow down here, and you'll notice that it actually has state as one of these items. Click on state and drag it over to here where it says y-axis under your visualization. All right. Now you notice that doesn't do anything by itself, but it's because we don't have an x-axis yet. So let's go ahead and go to orders and go to sum of sale amount for orders. And I want you to drag that and put that in the x-axis. Voila, we have a bar chart. Now I know this is not impressive. It will get more impressive here in just a second, I promise you, okay? But I want to start out simple because the simple stuff is best. So there's a few things that we want to point out moving here. So there's a lot of analysis here that we can do just based on this by itself. Let's go and clean this up a little bit. And let's show how we can actually make some cleanup work and make it look like a real graph. So over here on the paintbrush where it says format your visual, go ahead and click on that. And there are some ways that we can actually just clean things up and make them look appealing. We're just going to do something very basic. Go ahead and click on general. And you notice where it says title, there's a drop-down area. So let's go to title. It already has a title listed here, which you can see. It's up in the upper left-hand corner. I don't know about you all, but that's not really large enough for me. So I'm going to make that a little bit larger, make it 18-point font. Make it bold, because fortune favors the bold. Let's go ahead and center that so we can actually see what the graph is all about. And we can also manipulate the information here, state and sum sales amount by manipulating the X and Y axis. That's all we're going to do for now. Let's just go ahead, as good practice, let's go ahead and save this. I'm going to overwrite my previous version of this file. Just save it somewhere so you have it. It's always a good idea to have save file. Now, what are some ways that we can actually look at this information that's going to make it valuable? Well, there's a couple of different ways. The first and foremost way is going to make this active, an active data set that we can actually filter on multiple ranges. So it's actually got the filters already set for the X and Y axis. Let's go ahead and add another filter to the page as a whole, okay? So here's what we're going to do. Make sure I get this in the right spot. Okay. What I'd like for you to do is where it says flower name, go ahead and drag that on the filters on this page. And this is one of the cool things. I mean, I'm pretty old school, so this is not something we could do. We used to be able to do in Excel. It kind of is cool that we're able to do that now. Is that we can actually filter on what type of flower are going to be used. So if we have the select all, it shows all the flowers, and it looks like California is winning the flower buying race by a landslide. So they really like their flowers in California. But if you select one flower type, let's go select on carnations mixed. It's like Arizona's really big fan of mixed carnations. Which I wonder if it has to do with like the bowl parade celebrations that occur in Pasadena. That's California. So that would be what is it? Phoenix. That has a bowl, one of those there. Fiesta Bowl. That's what I'm thinking about. Maybe the carnations are used for that. I don't know. I'm speculating here. But we could actually just do this on multiple different arrays. We could actually look at all the carnations simultaneously by clicking on all the carnations. which is kind of cool. It's neat to be able to filter through that. Additionally, we're not limited to just this visualization. It's a categorical visualization. Oops. Let's get back here onto data to your visual. We're not limited to this. We can actually look at stuff that's a little bit more complementary to the type of visualization we're using. So you notice we're looking at this by state. Why don't we actually look at it by state instead of looking at a bar chart? The bar chart is fine, okay? I'm not saying a bad thing about bar chart, but wouldn't it be more beneficial if we could look at this according to, I don't know, the build map? Let's try that, see what happens. This is not as impressive as I would like it to be, but it actually does show, if you highlight on the states, what the sales amounts are there. And we could probably manipulate the values pretty easily, that within a certain range, we could add different colors here. Wouldn't be that hard. But yeah, that's basically it when we talk about what we can do with this. And this is not particularly difficult. We did some really basic stuff, but it was still a lot more powerful than you could have done in Excel 20 years ago. How do we actually do this? So let's go ahead and recap real quick. And I'm just going to really quickly save this, so I make sure I have all the information here. Just a quick recap on what we did. So first of all, first step, connecting to the data, we actually have to import it in there. We view the data, determine how the tables link. This is probably the most important step here. If the tables do not link, we cannot do this analysis. And you might say, how do you know that, Dr. Barnes? Have you actually had that experience? The answer is yes. I've actually had this experience with this data set where the tables didn't automatically link and I was trying to struggle and figure out what was going on. So having the tables link automatically really important. If they do not link automatically, we've got to figure out what are the keys and how do they relate to one another. So understanding that's important. Want to make sure we join the table, which we join the tables. The Power BI usually makes the good choices. That's in the model view. Then we calculate the new fields and then change the formats in the table view, prepare the visualizations in the report view, and we can add filters when we desired. Which gives us a lot more dynamic analysis capability than we would have otherwise. Now, like I said, this itself was not something you need to worry about saving. I think you might want to hang on to it for reference, but it's not something we're going to be submitting for an assignment. However, on Wednesday, you will have a Power BI assignment that you have to upload. I do believe I say this in the homework. The file for your Power BI analysis for homework is much, much larger than the one we did in class. If you start trying to import it, especially if you're online, if you're doing this through remote desktop on Truman State, it will take a little while to import all that data. Do not despair. Okay, do not go into a disarray of I don't know what the word I'm looking for. Don't get panicked. It will eventually load. It just takes a little while. And then once it's actually loaded, it's pretty quick to do the analysis. But the analysis itself, you should be able to do it. The one thing you might want to note is make sure that you remember back from the report views that we were talking about, is that you can actually manipulate where your views are, and we could actually do multiple views simultaneously. Like if I wanted to do another one over here, if I wanted to do another analysis, I can actually set these up and to run these simultaneously on the same exact data set, same exact filters. All right, I will see you all Wednesday for NetSuite and for homework.